So the thought of being a rock star has been quite appealing to a number of people over a number of different years. The adulation, the success and the fame has been something that has been intoxicating and has led people to come up with careers in the music industry. But as we know, there's been a lot of casualties with people who have found the fame but have had issues coping with that fame for whatever reason. Today we look at Richie Edwards, the Manic Street Preachers. It's been 30 years since he went missing. Also Syd Barrett from Pink Floyd. It's been nearly 50 years since he last interacted with the group. He obviously left the group a few years before that. And we really examine whether we've learned anything within the music industry with some of these casualties that occurred back in those particular days. Al, good morning. I hope everything's well. I thought we might just start with Richie Edwards. You're a massive fan of the Manic Street Preachers. Walk us through the point that where he all of a sudden went missing and what impact that had on the band.
Yeah, good morning, mate. Look, this is going to be a pretty deep kind of episode, really. We're kind of swapping stories here in terms of our two favourite bands, and it's almost two different stories, really, both with Richie Edwards for the Manic Street Preachers and then post Richie Edwards in 1995 when he disappeared on the 1st of February. So, as you mentioned, it's been 30 years, and I mean, he was legally declared dead back in 2008, but for the band, it's been one of those kind of never been able to put to bed stories, really. I mean, there's still songs that are created by the band to dedicate to him, and really, Richie was such a focal point of the band. He was the chief lyricist, and I mean, he wrote some pretty dark stuff, mate. Like the first two albums leading up to the third album, The Holy Bible, which was when he disappeared, we were looking around like lyrics around anorexia, depression, and this was real. This was stuff that Richie Edwards was going through, and he was the real drawing card of the Manic Street Preachers. People would go to watch the shows primarily for him. I mean, he really couldn't play an instrument. I mean, there's stories where he was actually on stage live and his guitar wasn't even plugged in, but he still had this charisma about him. It's just a real amazing story for the fact that the Manics were able to come out punching in 1996 with the release of Everything Must Go, which was a complete stripped back album of post Richie. I don't know, there's so many conversations to have here, mate, but I am interested in comparing with Syd Barrett because I don't really know a full amount about Syd's story.
Yeah, there's a lot of similarities. So with Syd Barrett, he was the original leader of Pink Floyd. The Piper at the Gates of Dawn was Pink Floyd's very first album back in 1967. And towards sort of the back end of 1967, he had a lot of impacts from the use of drugs, so LSD, acid, and he went really from probably a 6-month period for being effectively the lead of the band to being very, very non-functional, so much to the point that the band recruited David Gilmour as another member of the band. So a very brief period, they were actually a 5-piece band, but they didn't work out very well. And I think effectively early 1968, Syd Barrett was no longer part of the band. So he's left really to his own devices. So he didn't go missing per se, but he was no longer part of Pink Floyd from about that particular point in time. Now, after he left, there were interactions between the band and Syd Barrett. So David Gilmour was in helping producing some of his solo records. So it wasn't as if they were completely on non-speaking terms. But I think as time went by, Syd Barrett obviously drifted, and to the point where it was very rarely seen in public, up to the point of his death in I think about 2006.
Yeah, okay. So according to Roger Waters on the Joe Rogan Experience, he was talking about that event where he came into the studio, and for quite a while the band members didn't know who he was because he had obviously changed so significantly, put on a lot of weight, was very disheveled, and as you mentioned, became pretty much a recluse of his own devices. Can I ask you, was he still releasing stuff at that point of his deterioration, or that had all gone?
No, it was basically over by that point, and probably 2 years, I think it might have been. So he had a stab at his solo career. There was also another stab at trying to put a band together after those two albums.
Yeah, right. Okay.
But really wasn't very successful at all, and I think it was probably a couple of years since he left the music business, so to speak. To the point that interaction actually occurred, and as the accounts go, he was shaved off all his head. He looked nothing like what he did back in the days when they were actually part of the band. He was overweight. It was really obvious that there were lots of impacts on his drug use, on his mental health and his well-being, and effectively over time and that was pretty much the last time that they spoke, but it was very much at that point in time that he was more or less a recluse from that point up until his death, and the band members never saw him really again.
I mean, really, it's a real tragedy. I mean, both stories really, and it's interesting because Richie Edwards did literally disappear, and we don't know what's actually ever happened. So it's a bit of a what-if situation there. But I mean, if Richie Edwards was to go down the same path as Syd Barrett, it would have been an interesting situation, because they're both highly intelligent people, and the lyrics, especially for Richie Edwards, reflected that. But I really just don't know if Richie Edwards hadn't disappeared and whether he continued down a road of depression and maybe drugs or whatever, what would have happened. I mean, he could have still continued to punch out some amazing lyrics, but really, if we could have a conversation about the lyrics and the music that was produced by Syd and Richie, for me, because the lyrics of Richie Edwards were so reflective of his personal state and situation, listening to the Manic Street Preachers with Richie, it's pretty emotional. Like it's pretty raw. It's hard to describe. Like, it's almost, compared to music that's kind of written today, it's just real. Like, it's.
Yep.
I don't know how you'd summarise Syd Barrett's lyrics with Pink Floyd.
He was very good at his lyrics, but some of the later songs, especially in the Pink Floyd era, but also it's pretty obvious with his solo stuff, you can really get a read on his state of mind. It was very muddled. The song Jug Band Blues of A Source Full of Secrets, so he had one song on this second album, and that was it, basically. So effectively, by the time they released that album, he was not part of the band. But he had a very interesting way of him around his lyric writing. In fact, very influential, and it's been fairly much influential in things like Britpop and a lot of other genres. But by that stage, you could see that it was very muzzled and kind of sad in a way. You can kind of see, now you know what the story is. You can see that there were certainly issues there, and there was also talk of songs where he was in his final days of Pink Floyd, it was effectively trying to make up songs on the run that were just all over the place. So there's really no structure. He's very frazzled.
Yeah, right. And that Roger Waters kind of touches on that in his incoherent nature towards the end, and you just didn't know what you're going to kind of get from him, which is it's actually just really, really sad. And I guess it leads to a conversation about where does the music industry kind of sit here in terms of support for people. I mean, we're talking 50, 30 years ago, but we have had recent tragedies for the One Direction situation.
I don't know. I don't have any evidence, but I feel like that the industry has gotten a little bit more aware of the issues of mental health. So, for example, I think that Billie Eilish, other artists have been a lot more open with respect to talking about their particular issues. I mean, you've got to remember that some of these people, they're striving to be famous, right? But when it hits you, you probably don't fully understand what it's like to have that adulation just hit you like it probably does. And I think that's probably the thing that has changed.
Oh, I couldn't agree more, mate. I mean, really, you're probably looking at quite introverted people, really. So to be able to, put your cards on the table and perform and tour, it must be absolutely exhausting for people that don't necessarily have the ability to do that, yet still want to be able to do it.
Let us know in the comments as to whether you think the music industry has changed as a result of the experiences of Syd Barrett, Richie Edwards, and in fact others. We think that it has, but I think that there's always these lurking issues that will make it difficult for people coming into the music industry, especially when they're not used to some of the fame and adulation. So let us know your thoughts on that matter and let us know what you think.